worst movie ever.
Welcome to Movie Film. I'm Carl, and for those of you who don't know, this is Worst Movie Ever, or should I say the return of Worst Movie Ever, a show where I go on a search for the worst movie ever, although some of you may already know that a few months ago I crowned Star Wars The Last Jedi in a two-part episode the worst movie ever, and that remains true, but I kind of like doing these, so I decided to keep doing them. So I guess the new hunt is for a movie that's worse than Star Wars The Last Jedi. And I stand by it that Star Wars The Last Jedi is the worst movie ever made. If you don't agree with me, check out my arguments in the video up there. Just before we jump in, let me tell you why I started worst movie ever. It wasn't for YouTube fame because, you know, it's like at most 60 subscribers by now. The reason I started worst movie ever was because there's so many movies down the years that people tell me are fantastic. And I say, no, they're terrible. In fact, there's a whole playlist of movies that I say are terrible, but other people tell me are good. Although The Hitman one was just a terrible movie I want to talk about. Now with that little bit of administration out of the way, you may have already noticed from the thumbnail and the title, we have a new contender today in the form of Watchmen. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who love Watchmen who are saying, this guy is insane. They've probably clicked off the video already because they're like, what the hell is he saying? As you know, Irish. So jumping in to today's episode about Watchmen, the 2009 movie made by Zack Snyder. You know, who's better known nowadays for the Justice League, with the Snyder Cut coming out, or has come out already by the time this video is out. Something like that. But Watchmen, to my knowledge, was his first jump into superhero films. And it's a superhero film that's a little bit different, to say the least. It's certainly darker. It's certainly unique, and this movie was based on the graphic novel, loosely in places. So Watchmen is a movie that people down the years have told me is fantastic, and I very loosely remember watching it around the time it came out and being very bored. So I went back to it to review it for this channel, and if it was good, I would very much say it's good, and I'm going to highlight good points in this review, I'm going to highlight bad points in the review, and at the end we'll decide, is it worse than Star Wars The Last Jedi? It's probably not, because that's the worst movie ever, as I keep stating. So, generally on worst movie ever, we run down the story. So let's jump in. So Watchmen begins with a guy sitting on a couch, and it turns out he's a superhero, or a former superhero known as the Comedian. And a guy breaks into his apartment, the fight scene breaks out, it's a pretty good fight scene, and then he gets thrown out a window. So it's a pretty action-packed start to the movie. Also, he was watching the news before a guy broke in that kind of established the time setting. Following the death of the Comedian, we get a 10-minute long, or what seemed like a 10-minute long credit sequence, which kind of shows the former events of the Minutemen, the Crusaders to the Watchmen. One thing I will state right off the bat is that the cinematography in this film and just the overall look of the film is phenomenal, especially for a film done 11 years ago. Zack Snyder's films do tend to look pretty good. But then again, I said the same about Rian Johnson films, and they're all shit. Around the 12-minute mark, we jump into the film and we get Rorschach, who has a mask based on a Rorschach test, but it constantly changes. It's a really cool mask, it's a really cool look for a superhero in a film. It's totally unique to anything we've seen. He's not a Spider-Man or a Superman or a Hulk man. He's just a guy with a mask with a really cool mask. And there's a lot of establishing in the first 20 minutes. We see different superheroes, we see them interact with each other, we see Rorschach interact with, what's the guy's name? I'm just going to refer to him as the other guy, and you'll know who the other guy is because I'll put a picture on the screen somewhere. Rorschach's talking to him, and they're basically talking about, oh, we used to do this, we used to do that. Oh, I know about this place. There's a lot of on-the-nose dialogue to set things up. I kind of understand why it's like that, because if they're basing it on the comic book, they'd have to do that in the comic book. In a movie, on-the-nose dialogue is never good, and there's never an excuse for that, especially in such a high-budget movie. From this point on, Rorschach kind of seems like the main character, and he goes jumping around the place, and he's at a facility and he's clearly trying to break in, and he does break in, comes into a room where there's this blue guy, naked blue guy. It turns out he's Dr. Manhattan, one of the key characters of the movie, and I've got to say straight off the bat, one of the coolest characters I've ever seen in the movie. You know, he's blue, he can do everything. He can see time and space, he can see everything, he can split himself into multiple iterations of himself and work on multiple things. He can transform things, and they do this in very subtle ways. When he's talking to characters, he's working on things in the background. You just see them floating around and change, and it's really cool, and it's really well done, and it's a really great part of Watchmen. Watchmen has so many unique elements and so many great elements that this movie should be phenomenal, but it's not. back to the comedian being dead. Ultimately, they've established now that there's 4 superheroes. There's Rorschach, there's Dr. Manhattan, there's Silk Spectre, Mark II, I guess, the young Silk Spectre. Her mother is in it as well, as she was previously the Silk Spectre. She's now known as Laurie, played by Malin Ackerman, and there's the other guy. There's another character named Vite. I think his name is Vite. He's cashed in on being a superhero. He's revealed his identity, as all the superheroes have been forced to do. He's cashed in on it, made action figures, and he's head of a company. He's the rich guy, and he's in the movie somewhere too. So they're at the funeral for the comedian, and one by one we see a different superhero, and then we kind of get their flashback or their memory of the comedian. And each one is to establish that the comedian is an asshole. The first 20 minutes of the film, or 25 minutes of the film, are just to establish that the comedian is an asshole in various different scenes, including a very hard to watch attempted rape scene, where he attempts to rape the first Silk Spectre, and he's caught by the other heroes, and they beat the shit out of him, thankfully. They spent like 25 minutes establishing that the comedian's a complete asshole despite being a superhero. Later on, they show that he has regrets, because I guess that's important. So the movie takes along at an okay pace. There's a good bit happening to keep your attention. But I noticed around the 46-minute mark, this is a long time into a movie, 46 minutes, there was still no villain at all. There's no established bad guy. There's no one's actually done anything evil. There's just all these superheroes around who can't be superheroes, I guess, because they've been outlawed or something like that. So they've shown the comedian's part. They eventually move on to Dr. Manhattan. And they show that Dr. Manhattan was just a normal guy in a normal relationship in the 40s, I believe. And he was working with a research team, and he got into an accident, as all superheroes do, and that's how he got his superpowers, how he became the blue guy who knows everything and can do everything. And then 1 hour and 9 minutes into the film, Dr. Manhattan appears after his accident. He reforms as the blue guy for the first time in a flashback. This is the first time he became the blue guy. They show that part, and he transforms in a cafeteria, completely stark bollock naked for some reason. Don't know why we need to see his blue cock, but there you go. It's in there. They also show that Dr. Manhattan and Laurie, or the new Silk Spectre, are in a relationship. But she's not happy with Dr. Manhattan because his attention is split on his work. And they have a sex scene where Dr. Manhattan and Malin Ackerman's character, the Silk Spectre, they're getting together, they're on the bed, they're doing stuff, and there's more and more hands appearing, which is kind of weird. And that's how they established that Dr. Manhattan can split himself into different versions of himself. And he's got 2 of himself working on Malin Ackerman, and then she doesn't like that, so she gets up and storms out, she's giving out to him, and she looks to one side and realizes there's another version of him still working, and that pisses her off. So she ultimately leaves him, and he's left on his own, and she goes off to the other guy. You know what I'm talking about by now when I say the other guy. So Dr. Manhattan is kind of put on pause for a while. We've had the comedian story, we've had Dr. Manhattan's story. In the background, Laurie and the other guy, their stuff's going on. Carla Gugino's character's there too. She was the first Silk Spectre. She's in the background too. But now they move on to Rorschach. Rorschach has been in the film throughout, but now we get to his main part. He goes to this guy called Malik, and they have this exchange. And then he later on goes back to Malik's place, and Malik is dead in his apartment. And the police turn up just as Rorschach gets there. He's been framed for the crime. So ultimately, he is caught. He's arrested, and they pull his mask off, which drives him crazy. But he's brought to prison with all the guys he's helped capture. He's being interrogated by a guy, and he tells his backstory of how he became Rorschach and lost who he originally was. And now he's just Rorschach. He's just a criminal killer, beater-upper type guy. So while Rorschach is in prison, we jump back to Malin Ackerman's character and the other guy. She stays in his apartment. Ultimately, they decide they want to fight crime again because they haven't done that in a long time. This ultimately leads to an unnecessary sex scene, as most films around that time had. Sex in a spaceship for the sake of it. It didn't particularly add anything to the movie. Along the way as well, there's been stuff with Silk Spectre's mother, played by Carla Gugino, and she was the first Silk Spectre in the Minutemen in 1940. She was the one who was part of the attempted rape scene with the comedian, where they established he was a bastard. In it, we keep seeing visions of her having an argument with what I can only assume is Silk Spectre's father, or supposed to be her father, as she keeps getting these flashbacks. And ultimately, towards the end of the film, it's revealed that Carla Gugino's character ended up having sex with the comedian of her own volition afterwards, and that's how Malin Ackerman's character was conceived. Therefore, the comedian was her father. That's the big reveal at the end of the film. That whole storyline, while it might have been good in the graphic novel, in the movie it didn't add anything to the movie. The movie wouldn't have been worse without that storyline in it, because it's very much a background thing that they just throw in at the end. The rape scene was in there for shock value, and the reveal was in there to have another reveal. So just after the unnecessary sex scene, we're about an hour and 50 minutes into the film. Still no villain, but Malin Ackerman and the other guy, they're going off to break Rorschach out of prison. Little known to them is that Rorschach is already breaking out of prison, and he has his whole outfit back, his mask and everything, and he's about to get out. So the three of them ultimately escape, fly back to the other guy's base, and when they get there, Dr. Manhattan is there. And he takes Laurie to Mars, forgets that she can't breathe, then helps her breathe. And she sees this big thing and they have a whole conversation, and that's where he shows her the whole thing about her father, the comedian being her father. So just after this part, 2 hours into the movie, 2 full hours, they reveal that Veidt is the villain, the 5th or 6th guy that we haven't seen too much of, apart from one scene establishing that he was a hero and he was cashing in on that. That's the only time we saw Veidt. There was another scene where someone tried to kill him, but there was nothing to suspect that he was a bad guy. He hadn't been doing anything evil, he hadn't been setting up anything. The first we hear that Veidt is the villain is around 2 hours into the film. There was no reason to suspect that he was, other than he was like the rich guy. But there you go, again, the graphic novel might have worked. In the movie, it just didn't. Rorschach and the other guy have gone after Veidt. They figured out he's the bad guy, they're going to confront him, and he's already waiting for them. A fight scene breaks out between the three of them, and Veidt ultimately does the bad guy thing from like James Bond, where he reveals his plan. And at the time I was going, oh God, what the hell is he doing? Why is he doing this traditional bad guy thing of revealing his plan? Why would he reveal his plan? And then they got me. I'm going to fully admit they got me, because he did something spectacular in a movie. He revealed his plan, and Ned said to him, why would I tell you my plan? Because I've already done it. And then he revealed the plan has already happened. We don't see the plan happen, we just see that the timer is finished, that a bomb is going off in Manhattan in a movie, just in case anyone gets confused. Dr. Manhattan is going to be blamed for it. It was a very, very good reveal, very good bad guy thing, although keeping the bad guy hidden all the way through the movie just kind of made it shit. A superhero movie needs a super villain, and ultimately this one didn't have one. We never knew what the Watchmen were watching, what they were fighting. We saw a lot of their backstories that were unnecessary. So now Dr. Manhattan appears and he's going after Veidt. He's chasing him through this like facility and ultimately gets caught in a trap where he's basically caught in the same thing that gave him his powers, and he gets ripped apart. And so there's this weird cat thing that Veidt had as well. It was a cat with horns, I don't know why. Dr. Manhattan is effectively dead, or you're led to believe he is. And Veidt believes he is, and he goes back to face the other heroes and be like, this is why I did it, type of thing. But Dr. Manhattan has been through that before, and he's able to just re-establish himself, rebuild himself bigger. Like, that's the thing they established earlier in the film. He can change his size, he can change matter, he can do whatever he wants, so he can make himself bigger or smaller, which I'm sure is great in the bedroom, but pretty good for superhero movies too. So Veidt is kind of shocked when Dr. Manhattan reappears. And Dr. Manhattan looks like he's going to kill Veidt, but then Veidt has what he pretends is another weapon, and it's actually just a TV remote. He turns on the TV, and on the TV is Richard Nixon, the President of America at that time, because history changed because Dr. Manhattan was there. He was a nuclear deterrent. He helped them win Vietnam. He did all this great stuff to help America, apparently. So Nixon on TV reveals that the US and the Russians are teaming up against Dr. Manhattan. They're going to put their differences aside to focus on a common enemy. Therefore, there's now peace between Russia and the US. That's why Veidt did it. Evil with a reason. Which again, kind of makes sense, but if he did it earlier in the film, if he had a villain all the way through, it would have been even better. If we just didn't take 2 hours to reveal the villain, again, this movie would have been better. So Veidt claims he's brought world peace, or at least some form of peace. And the other heroes are calling bullshit, apart from Dr. Manhattan, who agrees. He agrees with the guy who set him up. And Rorschach tries to leave to, I don't know, fuck things up. And when he goes outside, a version of Dr. Manhattan is there. But there's also a version of Dr. Manhattan inside talking to Silk Spectre about why he agrees with Veidt. And Veidt's just kind of standing off to the background. We've seen earlier in the film, they established much earlier that Dr. Manhattan can split his presence and have different versions of himself doing different things. So there's one version talking to Rorschach, one version talking to Silk Spectre. And the other guy goes outside and he sees Dr. Manhattan talking to Rorschach. And Dr. Manhattan tells Rorschach he can't allow him to do what he's going to do, and ultimately he kills Rorschach. Not 100% sure why he had to kill him. So the other guy runs back inside, not to tell Silk Spectre what Dr. Manhattan did. He runs inside to start beating up Veidt. And he starts hitting him, and Veidt doesn't fight back. He just takes the hits to the face. Meanwhile, Dr. Manhattan tells Silk Spectre to stuff, his story, and the sense that he's going to leave, and he leaves. Fight ultimately gets away with it, and the others go back to being heroes. Although I believe in the graphic novel, I haven't read the graphic novel, but I believe the graphic novel ends very differently. So the film ends after 2 hours and 35 minutes, not including credits. The bad guy gets away with it. Superheroes are kind of disbanded. One of them's dead, one of them's left, and 2 of them are back at Carla Gugino's house. And the movie ends, and ultimately you're left going, fuck, that was a long movie.